All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank you all for being here and really excited to have you join us this evening. Also, a quick hello to all of those that are joining us online. My name is Greg Hull. I'm the Dean of the Herron School of Art and Design. Again, thank you for joining us this evening. We're really excited to have you here. And really pleased you could join us this evening for the third annual Michael A. and Lori Burns McRobbie Emerging Artist Series events. So really excited to move this forward. The annual series supports national and international emerging artists from diverse backgrounds through a variety of public lectures, residencies, and/or exhibitions at the Herron School of Art and Design. The goal of the program is to provide a platform for recipients to share innovative ideas and art practices while advancing learning experiences for themselves and across the campus community. So this the Michael A. and Lori Burns McRobbie Emerging Artist Series was created as a way to commemorate the former president and first lady of IU. So this is an opportunity to continue that. We're very fortunate to have our guests here this evening. Before we begin this evening's event, I also want to take a moment to thank our many patrons and friends of Herron. I'd also like to share that complimentary parking is made possible by the great frame-up of Indianapolis and Carmel. If you need parking voucher, let us know. We've got those for you in the gallery, but we'll take care of those. But now it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Herron's interim gallery director and curator, Oliver Hildebrand.
Thank you very much, Greg. Good evening. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you being here. I want to say a little bit about Max's exhibition, Swell. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a real pleasure. Swell is an exhibition of textile art and inflatable sculptures by Max Adrian, whose work explores ideas about queerness, desire, and consumerism. The inflatable pieces literally swell in response to the viewer's presence by filling with air, mirroring our own body's responses to movement, or to excitement, excuse me. Sewn from sensuous materials like pleather and faux fur, Adrian's work teases expectations of touch, performance, or pleasure. Works like the sensational inflatable Furry Divines take inspiration from queer subcultures, camp horror, and Adrian's past employment at a commercial mascot costume company. Ghosts of consumer culture haunt the exhibition through materials like repurposed Halloween decorations and used fast food billboards, which are intricately stitched into new forms like Frankenstein's monster. Bodies and objects are blurred in this postmodern playscape, asking how the things we desire impact a sense of personal identity and community in the midst of hyper-stimulation. Max Adrian, thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Does this sound good? How close do I need to be? Is this okay? Everyone here? Great. Cool. Hello, and thank you to you all for coming out tonight, to Greg, to Oliver, to Dawn, to everyone who's made this visit and this exhibition possible. It's been such a pleasure to be here the last few days and to meet so many students and to have studio visits and some great conversations. So yeah, thank you all for the warm welcome to Herron and Indianapolis. So as Oliver said in the introduction, I am a textile artist and I work a lot with sewing and soft sculpture, and these ideas of queerness, desire, consumer culture are intermixed in all of my work. At its most basic, I'm interested in what it feels like to want things, to want objects, to want entertainment, experiences. I'm most interested in this deeply felt, deeply personal experience of wanting another version of oneself, and that constant process of becoming that is unique to each of us as individuals. So yeah, and especially within the context of a culture where our attention is being pulled in so many different directions, coming very clear with ourselves about what it is that we want and desire is an ongoing process. Before I go into my my work and how my career has evolved over time, I want to flash back to some beginnings and to talk about where I started. So
I initially went to art school to study animation. And these are some still images from one of the only hand-drawn sequences that I made during that time, uh, of this little girl finding a magic jump rope. And as she jumps rope, she transforms into different objects or creatures, like a peanut or a cockroach. I love animation. I loved it then. I love it now. It's a major source of inspiration. I only lasted 5 weeks in that program before I realized that I was not cut out to be an animator. And I knew that I needed to pivot into something else. I really missed that sense of tactility of working with my hands. At the same time, I had this great love of animation and this interest in having a playful sense of humor with my work, an interest in personifying objects, an interest in narrative, and a sense of transformation. So even though I took a pretty hard pivot from animation into fiber, where I transferred, I still was the same person and I still had the same interests. So those found new ways to manifest. This is some of the work that I was making in undergrad. Very improvisational, soft sculptural installations that almost seemed frozen in a moment of animation or waiting to be interacted with. During this time, I really dug deep into developing a visual vocabulary that I still explore and expand on today. The colors that I'm often drawn to are bold, saturated, high contrast colors that speak about sports, games, advertising. They're very attention-grabbing colors. The material inventory that I tend to look at are materials that are very tactile, that are high in texture, things like vinyl, leather, fringe, faux fur, leather, materials that have a lot of myriad associations from toys, costume pieces, nightlife, performance. This was one of the last pieces that I made in undergrad. And it shows, I believe, a lot of my influences in theater and performance and drag, costume, puppetry. Even though I consider myself a visual artist, a soft sculptor, I get most of my inspiration from performance arts than visual arts necessarily. So that interest in theater and performance and drag inform a lot of the material, design, and conceptual choices that I'm making in my studio. After I graduated from undergrad, I had a lot of weird experiences in the arts. I got a grant that allowed me to study performance design around the world. I went to the Prague Quadrennial of Performance Design and Space in Prague in the Czech Republic, and really immersed myself in this 10-day symposium of international performance design that really took over the whole center city kind of part of Prague. I also went to Chicago for 5 months to do an apprenticeship with a theater called Red Moon Theater, which is sadly no longer in existence anymore. And I also worked for a puppet theater. So this picture on the bottom right is from working with this puppet theater, and we traveled to India, and I assisted on this international puppet festival with performers from all across the world, where we were performing in various cities around India. So in that kind of first year after undergrad, I really threw myself into a lot of experiences that were more in this world of performance and puppetry. And I saw so many amazing things, and I got so much inspiration from those experiences, even though, again, in my own studio, I'm more making sculptural kind of objects. Eventually, I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and I found a job at a commercial mascot costume company. So this is one of the examples of the kinds of costumes that we would make for some very high-profile commercial characters. Another costume that I assisted on. So I had already been kind of tinkering with inflatables in my studio. So this was a weird, like, universe has a way of doing things kind of thing. where I like had this experience in sewing. I'd been experimenting with inflatables, and then I found this weird ass job like making these inflatable characters. And I learned so many new sewing techniques during this job, and I collected a ton of materials, a lot of which are in the show down the hall right now, a lot of which are still in my studio that I'm continuing to pull from. So that experience taught me a lot, and it aligned with my studio in this way where I was learning and accumulating materials. Back in my own studio, I was definitely influenced from that day job, and I started to make these inflatable sculptures. I wasn't conceiving of them as mascots at this time. They were sculptural forms, abstracted bodies, objects that were life size, that had limbs, orifices, bulges, adornments. This image also shows a little bit of my process with inflatables, where I always start with this nylon ripstop base material, which allows the inflatable to hold air. And then if I have an exterior layer like faux leather or faux fur or spandex or whatever the exterior is, then I essentially make the sculpture twice. I do it the first time in nylon and the second time in whatever that heavier exterior material is. And the ripstop allows that heavier material to inflate. So those pieces that I was developing eventually became these pieces here. And this is an installation image from the first solo show that I ever had in Columbus. This was in April of I actually think this was not 2017. But you can see with these that I'm using these kind of industrial fans to inflate the sculptures, and that would later change. But fast forward a few years, and that series grew into this larger series that I call the Sensational Inflatable Furry Divines, as this bombastic kind of campy gesture. So the Furry Divines for me are these abstract mascots that are not motivated by consumerism. They don't want you to buy anything from them. Rather, they represent feelings about bodies and concepts like fearsome desires or insatiable appetites. I switched the way that I inflated these pieces at this time, and I like dug back into the piece and redesigned the bottoms so that they have this more discrete blower, and I also constructed these stages. So I think of them as kind of performing on these stages as they inflate and deflate, mirroring our own bodies, changing states over time. And there's an interesting thing that happens with so many of these in space together, where it kind of becomes a conversation amongst bodies, and your body at a similar scale in there, you kind of become invited into their fray. I love working at this scale, which I consider drag queen scale. It's a scale that's just a little bit larger than your own body. And I think that it really plays up your own awareness of your own physicality, which is something that I'm always trying to do with my work, is to activate your awareness of your body. I'll just kind of quickly go through the cast of characters of the Furry Divines. There's Jester, the Furry Divine of cowardly courtship. There's Luther, the Furry Divine of questionable head. There's Solo, the Furry Divine of fearsome desires. Corona, the Furry Divine of insatiable appetites. And lastly, Sabina, the Furry Divine of violent revelations. I'll use Sabina here to kind of dig in a little bit to my process with some of these pieces, where even though I'm working in this series, I rarely know the final outcome when I approach a piece. And Sabina here started purely from an idea of material contrast. I had a ton of this white faux fur, and I had some of this red glitter material as well. And there's something about that contrast of those materials that really intrigued me. So I just started playing and experimenting with how the white fur, or the white fur and the red glitter material can come together. And through my material investigations, I came to this idea of a gash, of violence, of a bleeding through. And so as the piece started to evolve into this character, into one of the Furry Divines, it really became a reckoning, a reconciling with ideas of violence in lots of forms. Reconciling the love that I have for campy horror films with real outrage that I feel at violence directed toward queer and marginalized people, particularly trans and queer people of color. The violence of whiteness is very much a part of this piece as well. The violence of repression and oppression, the violence of misogyny and transphobia within queer spaces even. So there's a lot that's like I'm contending with and thinking about in this piece, but that wasn't the starting point necessarily. It started from material investigation and expanded from there. So also at the same time that I'm working on these pieces, what else was I doing? What else was I doing with my life? I had weird art jobs, as many of you can relate to. One of which I worked for Otherworld in Ohio, which maybe some of you have heard about. It's an immersive art experience along the lines of Meow Wolf. So I worked on a lot of textile installations for them in my day job, and then at night I'd be working in my studio. Here's another example of something that I did for them. So yeah, as artists out in the world, like you find weird ways to support yourself and use your niche skill sets. I also attended several art residencies during that time, which took me to places like the Smoky Mountains, pictured here. For those who may not be familiar with the concept of residencies, an art residency provides time, space, and oftentimes financial support that allows artists to really dig in and develop their work for, it could be a couple weeks, it could be a month, it could be a year. So the time frame and the location can really vary. One of the most influential residencies for me was at this place. This is Herron School of Arts and Crafts in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I was a resident here from the summer of 2017 to the summer of 2018. And this was a hugely influential time for me. But what is Herron? Herron is an arts and crafts school. They offer 1 to 2 week workshops that are at times directed more toward their local community around Gatlinburg and Sevier County in Tennessee. But during the summer and the fall, they're more national and international. So they have national, international artists coming in to teach these workshops, students from all around the country or around the world sometimes coming to take these. And it's just like craft summer camp for a week. It's an amazing experience. And they also have great exhibitions around their campus. So during the residency, living there for a year, I was supported to continue developing my work, as well as getting real professional experience of what it means to work with an arts nonprofit like Herron. So I did a lot of administrative work. I helped with the other residents. We were all responsible for mounting all of the exhibitions around campus. So this was kind of a simultaneous professional practice experience where I learned a lot of those skills, and I had the time and space to develop my personal work. I started this series called The Buddies during my time at Herron. This was a way for me to make something smaller and quicker, especially in comparison to the Furry Divines, which can take weeks and weeks to make, as well as a way to quickly experiment with material combinations. I was thinking a lot about community and kinship with this series, or oftentimes feeling like the lonely queer person in these craft spaces. For reference, each of these buddies is about 18 inches tall. Scale can be a little hard to tell from these pictures. And also with these works, I'm exploring this visual language around kink and fetish a little bit more directly too. The buddies eventually grew into this much larger ongoing piece that I call the buddy community. And none of these buddies that are picked, I don't possess any of these buddies anymore. Like over the last several many years, they've come and gone, and they've found other homes, and I've made new buddies. And the 3 buddies that are in the gallery now are the only 3 that I have left. Oh no, there are some in another show right now. Anyway, the buddy community is constantly changing, as as are all of our relationships and communities. So I never display this piece the same way twice. The particular arrangements are always changing. Yeah. And just a note about quilting, like as an artist who's sewing as my primary process, quilting is a big part conceptually of what I'm thinking about in my work. This pictured is the AIDS Memorial Quilt, which is a craft monument honoring the hundreds of thousands of lives lost to HIV and AIDS over the years. And it's similarly to how I work on some of my pieces. It's constantly growing and changing, and it's not displayed the same way twice. And I love thinking about quilting and craft as a form of memory keeping, as a way of telling stories, as a way of connecting to ideas of chosen family and lineage. These are just some examples of some more quilt referential pieces that I started to explore in the studio. This piece here consists of these vinyl envelopes that I constructed and grommeted together that contain within them intricate pieceworks made from leather, scraps of underwear. It becomes this modular archive in a way. Eventually, I decided that it was time to go to grad school. I really resisted that for a long time. And I got to a place where I started to feel a little too comfortable with the routines that I was making for myself in the studio. And I needed some wrenches thrown into the systems that I was creating. I wanted to be challenged I wanted to be challenged to find new ways to think about my art, to think about myself as an artist, and to find new ways to connect with people about art by talking about it. And part of that involved research, and there were a lot of like heavy academic texts that were involved in that time. My grad program really put an emphasis on finding research for ourselves that really resonated with us specifically. So a lot of the things that I found and latched onto dealt with queer theory, game theory, affect theory. This with grad school, with this time, I started to kind of zoom outward, where the core of the work was still these ideas of queer identity and personal desire, but zooming out from there into thinking about overarching systems or structures of desire. So questions that I started to formulate for myself in my work, questions like how are our desires mediated? How are our desires marketed or controlled? A big question that I had was, what does it mean to behave queerly rather than to identify as queer? That there is a difference between the presentation and the action of queerness. And how has the mission of self-expression become part of the status quo in a way? So those were all questions that I don't necessarily have concise, concrete answers to. They were questions that were guiding a lot of the thinking and making that I was doing during the time. These were just some kind of guiding. I'm not going to go through these like line by line, but these are just some personal guiding thoughts for me about thinking about queer systems and structures during the time. It really, in essence, comes down to a lot of process, giving myself permission that the work doesn't and shouldn't make logical sense, that if I don't want to be easily explained as a queer person, why would I want my art to be so easily explained? So to embrace complexity, to embrace messiness, to be silly and stupid, like that became a big part of my goal in the studio. And again, this kind of through line, the sense of transformation was really important to me. So one piece that I started during this time was that I stopped throwing away any of my scrap material. And I instead made these waste cubes of all of my scrap material. It became this like archive of my studio development, as well as a reminder of my accumulation and my consumer habits as an individual and as an artist. And this piece has grown a lot over the years, and I have a whole big tub of scrap material that's just waiting to be made into more blocks. So it's interesting. Like with this piece, with the more blocks that I'm making, it presents more opportunity for more complex structures to be built at the same time that it becomes a bigger burden. Like I'm literally storing and transporting my trash. So it's this dual kind of feeling of possibility and burden. This is an image of my first semester of grad school review. One of the big projects that I started doing in that first semester, I knew I wanted to take my work into this architectural direction. And I knew that I wanted things to be modular and easily stored or reconfigured in different ways. So I set myself certain parameters with these yellow furry architectural components and just made a lot of them without a real necessarily like concrete idea of what they would go into, other than just like kind of building an inventory of toys or tools for me to work with. And as I accumulated those objects, I played with them and combined them with found materials from my personal consuming habits. I had it as an interactive piece at one time. I was trying not to get too attached to any one set vision for what these components like had to be. Rather, I wanted them to be tools for me to think about possibility and a way for me to feel surprised in the work. It was also a way for me to think about this like dual feeling with thinking about consumerism, consumer habits, reconciling with this kind of dual sense of pleasure and shame that I feel as a consumer was a feeling that I was trying to explore with some of this work. And this precarious kind of leaking, vibrant, alluring structure that's multiple things contrasting at once. So this piece went through this very maximalist phase. And these days, this is more how I've been showing it lately. So it went through that really big, wacky, crazy phase, and now it's a lot more refined in a way, though I'm still combining it with found materials. There's in the last piece, it was leaking goo, and that's been like a fun thing to keep playing with. So this piece still leaks goo. That felt important to me. I also use these pieces as props or like miniature set pieces for videos that I'm making. And these are some details here showing the accumulation of goo drips on the floor. The image on the left is showing a video that's embedded into the piece itself. And these videos that I'm making with these objects really resemble kind of ASMR or even BDSM strategies, thinking about the sensory experiences that we have from videos. So this tower really becomes a body in my mind that's operating with its own ambiguous sense of maintenance and pleasure. So drawing is actually a pretty big part of my practice, but it's not it's never as like a final outcome. It's always a part of a process. It's a generative part of my process for me. So doodling is big. I have lots of sketchbooks of doodling with like lots of things like this. And especially after or during and after COVID, where I had to vacate my school. So I started school in fall of 2019, and spring of 2020 started COVID school. So during that time where I had to leave campus, I really had to limit my processes and my materials. And during those initial several months, I drew a lot, I read a lot, and I limited my sewing to pretty much just working with nylon ripstop because it's lightweight, it's portable, and I was able to just pack up my studio or my sewing machine and that material and come back home and work out of my basement for a while. So a lot of the doodles that I was doing during the time related to architecture, thinking about doorways, portals, windows, thinking about soft, portable structures, modular structures, in my mind, thinking about these temporary places of potential, like a stage. I also taught myself Google SketchUp as a way to begin translating some of the doodles that I was doing in my sketchbook into kind of a architectural blueprint, and then using this as a blueprint for making sculpture. So this is showing an in progress of that 3D rendering into an actual object, which became this piece, a fallible complex, which begins deflated as this kind of puddle of fabric on the floor. And as it's activated, it begins to unfurl itself and reveal into this 12-foot wide by 8-foot tall by 6-foot deep bounce house-esque structure that's kind of playing with these modernist utopian architectural languages. It's this large, vibrant structure that's inviting you to come in with its vibrant interior, but presents no clear entry. This doorway that's kind of carved out of the middle is blocked. So as you approach it, there's no way for you to enter inside. So the piece asks you to reframe your associations to the object and to find new ways to think about it and engage with it. So for me, especially during COVID, it was thinking a lot about these virtual spaces, thinking about spaces that are out of reach, that we don't have access to, this idea of yearning to inhabit a space. And I later kind of dug back into the piece, and I wanted to challenge the way that it was activated. So I worked with a coding friend of mine to make this push button. So now this kind of like HAL 3000 big red button like invites you to come press it. And as you press it, that activates the inflation. And once it inflates, it stays inflated for 10 minutes, and then it deflates, and it has a reset period where it can't be inflated again. I kind of wanted to like challenge the viewer because I figured that there would be this reaction to like keep pressing the button. And I wanted to thwart the expectation of that. Like, actually, no, you have to wait. You have to be a little patient. But this structure has some agency in a way. So those videos were from a big solo show that I had about a year ago down at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. And I'll use this moment to just kind of talk about like what life has been like post grad school, where I graduated in the spring of 2021, and it's been a weird time. It's been a weird like few years, and I've been in this mode of doing more exhibitions than actually producing work, which on one hand is great. It's nice to get work out into the world and rather than to be stored in boxes. So that's been kind of a different mode that I've been operating in. And I've been more focused on like, it sucks, but like on money, on having a livelihood that sustains me and my partner. And for so long, this lifestyle of residency hopping, of applying for art grants, of doing the weird, odd art gig here and there, that really worked for me for a long time. And it provided a lot of great, really cool experiences that I still reflect fondly on, and that gave me so much inspiration. And it got to a point where the anxiety around sustaining my livelihood was just getting to be too much. So it became this moment of having to really reconcile with like the changes that I would need to make as an artist within my art practice and as an individual, because obviously like who we are as individuals and who we are as artists, they're so intermingled and they're not separate at all. So yeah, I continued to attempt to develop my work. I had a residency last year in Columbus at the Cultural Arts Center, which is a phenomenal place that does workshops for everything from wheel throwing to weaving on a loom. And it was during this residency where I realized like something really needed to change, because I had this great opportunity and I had this amazing studio, this amazing community of people, of makers, and I was so stressed out. Like just getting myself to the studio and to make things became a really big struggle. And I worked in the studio, and I was able to get some things out of that time. And I realized by the end of that I needed a job, to be quite honest. So this is some of the work that did come from that time. So in this last image on the floor here, this is an old Panda Express billboard that I got from so at the Cultural Arts Center. It's this beautiful historic building, and they cover their floors with billboards to protect the wood flooring. So they were like, if you want any of this vinyl, like have at it. So I dug into this Panda Express billboard and made these deflated geodesic domes, thinking a lot about Buckminster Fuller and theories around utopian architecture, failed promises of utopia, connecting that to the failed promises of consumer culture, with thinking of these as billboards that want you to buy orange chicken, and also relating that to the sense of deflation that I was feeling very personally. So at the end of this residency, I realized that my livelihood could not depend solely on my artistic output. And I went through a couple months of just applying for tons of jobs. And most of those jobs I didn't even want that I applied for, but I knew that something needed to change. And the one job that was a total cold call, I just sent an email to a theater in Columbus saying, hey, I'm an artist in town. I'm looking for work. Is there any chance that you might need somebody? And they said yes. And last February, I started working as the costume manager at the Short North Stage, regional theater in Columbus. And since I've started working there, I've also become a production manager for some shows coming up in the spring. I'm costume designing our show coming up, in a couple weeks. Oh yeah, that's going to be really, yeah, it's a busy time. It's a very busy time. And it's been great. It's been a really great change of pace for me to relieve some pressure from my artistic practice, to tell myself and my artistic practice that you don't have to be everything for me to be a happy, comfortable human. That there are other ways that I can apply my skill set, that I can be a part of a community to sustain myself. So yeah, it's great to be in this new theater community, where I am collaborating. I'm not alone in my studio like all the time like I used to be. And it's also nice to have a regular paycheck. Like that's undeniable. There's something about being backstage that's really fun to me. And I've been collecting images and videos and sound recordings of being backstage. I don't really know why or like what I'm going to do with any of that material, but I'm just kind of archiving it for myself. So this is an example of my backstage view during a production of Hair, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with Hair, but that's the show where everyone gets naked at the end of Act 1. So this is right before I hand all of the naked performers their robes as they come off the stage. And all of this brings me to this moment in this exhibition, Swell, here at Herron. So we've come full circle. And this exhibition is a really interesting combination of work for me from different periods of time, from hustling in the costume mascot shop, while making the Furry Divine pieces and working my other odd art jobs, and working through my post-grad school anxieties. All of that work is kind of in the same space together in this show. And themes around desire, consumerism, performance, they're all mixed together in these pieces. And I'm just going to kind of end on this last piece, which is so new, like so fresh. I literally, quote unquote, finished it yesterday. I've titled this Protagonist. He's kind of a monster in the closet. I love horror films and horror video games. Like, I just feel such a draw to the horror genre. And I think that queer people often relate to horror and the concept of monstrous characters that have been ostracized for their sense of monstrousness, and owning that and defining that. So I'm just kind of having fun with that idea of the queer monster. And by titling it Protagonist, I'm really trying to gesture toward a sense of like empathy for a body that represents differently than maybe what an expectation might be. So yeah, this piece has been really fun to work on. It's been one of the first pieces in a while that I've really felt energized and activated, like as an artist, and into making and playing with. It's also the first piece in a while that's really surprised me. And I love that. I love that as much as possible to create moments of surprise for myself. And in conclusion here, I just want to kind of end with a parting queer wish for all of you that you surprise yourselves in your lives as people and as artists with lots of moments of unexpected growth and transformation. So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for listening.
All right, well done, and thank you. Can you hear me okay? Oh, it is working, very good. Well, I want to thank you, and we're really excited to help you on your journey as an emerging artist. And one of the first 3 McRobbie emerging artists. We're really excited to help you on your next path. So
It's a real privilege.
thank you for being here. And I did want to take a moment to thank our friend Elias Garcia for helping us connect with this artist. So thank you, Elias. We really do appreciate it. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to share a microphone with you, but does anyone have any questions? I'll give it a second. Very good. Thank you.
It's not really a question, but a statement, because I think it was such a comprehensively well thought out presentation. So thank you for that. I guess if the one thing that out of curiosity was how, if you could speak more into the relationship between balancing your creative mind with a sense of stability in life. And I think that we all resonate with that at some point or struggle with it.
Yeah.
When we're trying to produce creativity as almost a commodity or a way to live.
Right.
I appreciate that you brought that to the forefront in some way to the presentation. So I'll leave you with that.
Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your show title, about Swell. I like to. What can you say about it?
Yeah. So with thinking about inflatables, the thing that I initially really gravitated to was the relationship to our bodies between like watching an inflatable like rise and fill with air. So and trying to find a title that kind of connected with a lot of the work from different kind of times in my artistic career or whatever. This idea of swelling came through as a through line. Even in like the deflated pieces, there's the kind of absence of swelling. So it's a gesture toward bodies, of making a connection between the artwork itself and our bodies. It's also like things are swell, like there's kind of a cheekiness there, where I think my work is very colorful, vibrant, playful, approachable. And then there's underneath that layer, there are deeper concepts and more, just more personal, intimate kinds of ideas and feelings that are there for those who are interested or eager to like explore beyond the surface. So, whenever I hear the word swell used as like things are great, like I never believe it. So that's also at play, I guess.
All right. Are there other questions? Very good. Well, please, if you'd like to stay and chat in the hallway, please join us. But Max, thank you again. We really appreciate your time, and thank you. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you all again for joining us this evening. We really value your time, so thank you for being here.